Las Vegas minus 1,953. The neon city that never slept. The Sands Hotel glowed like a crown in the desert night. Gold lights spilled onto the pavement. Laughter floated through open doors, and inside legends were being made. Dean Martin sat alone at the end of the bar. Not the Dean Martin the world saw on stage. Not the smiling, confident crooner. This was Dino Paul Crocetti, the man behind the mask. His tie was loose, cigarette burned low between his fingers. The room buzzed with musicians, gamblers, agents, and dreamers. Everyone was chasing something. Dean? He was running from something. He had just finished a show perfectly sung, perfectly timed, perfectly empty. Applause still echoed in his ears, but his heart felt quiet. Too quiet. Another whiskey, he told the bartender. Before the glass even touched the counter, a voice cut through the smoke. Careful, Dino. You drink like you're trying to forget something. Dean didn't look up. He already knew the voice. Frank Sinatra. Frank stood a few steps away, hat tilted just right, eyes sharp as ever. He had the kind of presence that bent rooms around him. People stopped talking when he entered. Respect followed him like a shadow. Frank pulled out the stool beside Dean and sat. Big crowd tonight, Frank said. Big applause, big smile. Dean smirked. Yeah. Didn't feel big to me. Frank studied him for a moment. You ever notice, Frank said slowly, how the loudest applause doesn't always reach the heart? Dean finally looked at him. Frank saw it then, the tired eyes, the quiet frustration. You're stuck, Dino. Dean exhaled smoke. Everyone's stuck, Frank. Frank shook his head. No, you're comfortable, and that's worse. Dean's jaw tightened. I sing, I perform, I fill seats. That's my job. Frank leaned closer. You used to write. You used to dream. Now you just repeat. Dean's fingers twitched around the glass. You think I can't write anymore? Frank smiled. I think you don't believe you can. Silence fell between them. The piano in the corner played something slow, soft, sad. Then Frank reached into his coat. He pulled out a folded stack of bills. Thick. He placed it on the bar between them. $1,000. Dean stared at it. Frank said calmly, I bet you $1,000. You can't write a song in 10 minutes. Dean laughed one short, bitter, 10 minutes. Frank nodded. Lyrics, meaning, something real. Dean leaned back. You think I'm empty? Frank didn't flinch. I think you're scared. That hit harder than any punch. Dean straightened. 10 minutes. Frank checked his watch. Starting now. The clock starts. Dean didn't move at first. The bar noise faded into a blur. All he could hear was his own heartbeat. You're scared? You're comfortable. You've stopped dreaming. He reached for a napkin, then stopped. No, this wasn't about winning money. This was about proving something to himself. He stood, walked toward the piano, and sat. The keys felt cold under his fingers. He closed his eyes. Memories flooded in. His father working in steel mills. His mother singing Italian lullabies. His first broken heart. His first standing ovation. The loneliness after fame. His fingers touched the keys. A soft chord. Then another. A melody began to rise. Not flashy. Not showy. Honest. Frank stood behind him. Silent now. The room around them blurred. Dean whispered the first line. I used to chase the morning sun. The words came slowly, then faster. He wasn't thinking anymore. He was feeling pain, hope, regret. Love. His pen moved across the napkin, line after line, verse after verse. The piano followed his heart. 5 minutes passed. Frank checked his watch. 7. Dean's voice shook as he sang the last line. But I found myself, when I lost you, silence. The room had stopped. People nearby stared. Frank didn't move. He looked at his watch again. Then at Dean. Time. Dean turned slowly. His eyes were wet. He held up the napkin. Full. Every inch filled with words. Frank took it. Read once. Then again. Then he smiled. Not his usual showman smile. A real one. Frank folded the napkin carefully, placed it in his pocket, then picked up the money and pushed it toward Dean. You just wrote the best thing you've done in years. Dean didn't touch the money. I didn't do it for the cash. Frank nodded. I know. Frank stood. But before walking away, he turned back and said the words Dean would never forget. Dino, you don't need applause to feel alive. You need truth. Frank walked into the crowd. Dean sat there. Still, the song echoed in his chest. He wasn't empty. He was just asleep. And tonight, he had finally woken up. Dean Martin did not go home that night. He walked instead. Las Vegas was quiet in the early hours, the kind of quiet that only comes after too much noise. Neon signs blinked like tired eyes. The city felt empty, but his mind was crowded. Frank's words kept repeating. You don't need applause to feel alive. You need truth. Dean had sung for years, but now he realized something unsettling. He hadn't listened to himself in a long time. Back in his hotel room, he sat on the edge of the bed with a napkin in his hand. The words were still there, rough but honest. Not polished, not perfect, but real. He read the song again. Each line felt like it came from a place he had avoided. He lay down without turning off the light, but sleep didn't come. The melody played in his head like a broken record. Not loud, just steady. Persistent, like it wanted something from him. At sunrise, Dean was still awake. He got dressed and went straight to the piano room in the hotel, a quiet space used by musicians who practiced when no one was listening. He sat down and played the song again. This time slower. He adjusted a word. Changed a line. The song grew. Not bigger, deeper. By mid-morning, his fingers were sore. His voice was hoarse. But the song finally felt finished. Not because it sounded good, but because it felt honest. That afternoon, his manager, Lou Novak, found him in the room. Lou had been with Dean since the early days, back when shows paid in sandwiches and handshake promises. Lou listened without interrupting. When the last note faded, Lou didn't clap. He just said, "Who wrote that?" Dean answered quietly, "I did." Lou stared at him. Then he said something unexpected. "Why haven't you been doing this?" Dean looked at the floor. "I forgot how." Lou leaned against the wall. "No," he said. "You were scared of what you'd find." That landed hard. Later that week, Dean was scheduled for another show at the Sands. Same stage, same crowd, different feeling. He stood backstage, holding the napkin in his pocket. The MC announced his name. The audience cheered. Dean walked out, smiled, and did what he always did. He sang the classics. He joked. He charmed. The crowd loved it. But then he paused. The band looked at him, confused. Dean turned to the pianist. "Follow me," he said quietly. The room went still. He took a breath and started the new song. At first, people didn't know how to react. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't playful. It was slow, reflective, human, but something shifted. People leaned forward. The laughter stopped. By the second verse, you could feel it. The audience wasn't watching a performer anymore. They were listening to a man. When Dean finished, he didn't bow. He just stood there. The room stayed silent. Then one person clapped. Then another. Then the whole place rose to its feet. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Backstage, Frank Sinatra was waiting. He didn't say much. He just shook Dean's hand and said, "Told you." Dean smiled. But deep down, he knew something bigger had changed. Not his career, him. That song wasn't just music. It was a door, and once opened, it would never let him go back to sleep again. The applause from that night followed Dean Martin for days, not in his ears, in his chest. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he had performed. He felt like he had spoken. But truth has a cost, and Dean was about to learn what it was. A week after the Sands show, his agent called. Not Lou, not Frank. A man from the record company. His voice was polite, professional, and cold. "We heard the new song," the man said. "It's interesting." Dean waited, but it's not. "Marketable," the voice continued. "It's slow, introspective, too personal." Dean leaned back in his chair. "People liked it." "Yes," the man replied. "But people buy what they recognize, not what makes them uncomfortable." That word hit him. Uncomfortable. After the call, Dean sat alone in his living room. The piano was across from him. The song sat inside him, and the industry was asking him to choose safety or honesty. Later that night, Lou came over. Dean played the song again. Lou listened like before, quiet, focused. Then he said, "They're scared of change." Dean nodded. "So what do I do?" Lou took a breath. "You decide who you are now." Dean didn't answer. He went for a drive instead. The city lights blurred past his window. Billboards, theaters, bars, his own face on posters. He had built a life on charm and smooth edges, but this song had rough corners. And rough corners cut people. The next day, the studio called again. This time, they were direct. "If you want our support, stick to the formula," they said. "Don't confuse your audience." Dean smiled to himself. They weren't worried about his audience. They were worried about control. That night, Frank stopped by. No warning, no schedule. He poured himself a drink and sat on the couch. "You look tired," Frank said. Dean laughed. "You look like trouble." Frank nodded. "Usually am." They talked about nothing at first. Old stories, bad shows, worse hotels. Then Frank asked the real question. "You gonna let them bury that song?" Dean stared at the floor. "They say it's not me." Frank leaned forward. "Then who is it?" Dean didn't answer. Frank stood up. "Let me tell you something," he said. "The world already has enough masks. What it needs is more faces." He walked to the door, then stopped. "You either sing for permission or you sing for meaning," and left. Dean didn't sleep that night. He sat at the piano until morning, not playing, thinking about his father's tired hands, about his mother's voice, about the boy he used to be. At sunrise, he picked up the phone. He called the studio. "I'm recording the song," he said. There was silence on the other end. Then, "That's not what we agreed on." Dean's voice was calm. "Then we're not agreeing anymore." He hung up. That decision cost him. Radio stations hesitated. Executives cooled off. Some doors closed quietly, but something else happened too. Letters started arriving, handwritten, from people who heard the song live. A soldier, a widow, a factory worker. They all said the same thing in different words. "Thank you for saying what I couldn't." Dean read every letter, and for the first time, he understood something simple and dangerous. If you tell the truth long enough, the right people will find you, even if the powerful ones walk away. The first time the song was played on the radio, it wasn't announced. No fanfare. No promotion, just a quiet voice in the middle of the night. Dean Martin was driving when he heard it. He almost missed it. The host didn't say his name, didn't hype it, just played the track. Dean pulled the car over and listened, not as the singer, as a man. The song didn't sound like a gamble anymore. It sounded like a confession. And confessions don't age. They travel. Within days, people started talking. Not critics, not executives, ordinary people. Taxi drivers, waitresses, night shift workers. They called stations asking, "Who is that voice?" The industry noticed. Slowly, reluctantly. Sales followed. Then interviews. Then requests. But Dean didn't rush. He kept writing. Not for charts, for clarity. Months later, he stood on a different stage, not the Sands. A smaller theater in Chicago. No spotlight tricks. Just a microphone and a piano. The room was full. Not with fans chasing glamour. With people looking for something true. Dean walked out alone. He didn't smile right away. He looked at the crowd. Then said, "This next song was written in 10 minutes. But it took me 10 years to be honest enough to sing it." The audience didn't clap. They listened. After the show, Frank was waiting in the hallway. Older now, quieter, but still sharp. He hugged Dean and said, "You won the bet a long time ago." Dean smiled. "You never paid me." Frank laughed. "Because you got something better." Dean thought about that. He had. The song didn't make him rich. It made him real. Years later, long after the lights had dimmed and the stages had changed, people still played that song. Not because of who sang it, but because of what it said. It reminded them of something simple. That courage doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like a man sitting at a piano finally telling the truth. And that truth, once released, doesn't belong to the singer anymore. It belongs to everyone who hears their own story inside it. The bet was forgotten. The money was irrelevant. But the song remained, and so did the lesson, that the most powerful thing you can ever give the world is your honest voice.